They say when you wear Black Power Media gear, you can accomplish anything. You play any and every position. Coaching, to kicking, to receiving, to running and juking. And oh my goodness, I see that again in slow motion. Get off me. And you're going to have a lot of haters coming at you, but what you got to do is you got to shake them off, and get to your goal and accomplish it. And when that's done, it's a beautiful thing. I'm talking about going hard, extra, for that extra point. And when it's done beautifully, you talking about touchdown. Oh, and the crowd goes wild and they're celebrating with you and everything. Man, let's see that again. Nice.
Black Power Media, baby. That's how we do it.
Now go to blackpowermedia.org and get you some of that gear. Empower yourself today. Yeah.
I mix what I like, what I like, what I like, what I like. I mix what I like, what I like.
Yeah. What's up, world? Welcome to another edition of I Mix What I Like right here on BPM. Again, I'm Jared Ball. Very happy to be your host. Very happy to be here, especially on this Easter Sunday. Yes, indeed. Happy Easter. Happy spring equinox. And I'm assuming so Passover has to be around the corner, you know, because this is what it's all about. And I can't wait till Dr. Tashaka gets here to ask him about this. I was just watching his relatively recent interview a year or so ago with Dr. Diop and Obenga, who's worked on this and elsewhere. I'm very familiar. Can't wait. Welcome. So come on in. As Ear Doctor says, tell a friend that we back and it's on again. Welcome to the remixers piling in. Yes, Leah, welcome. And Mark, you got it. You got it, baby. This is the day of the rising. We empty tombing it over here. Now, come on, David. I'm not in a cave. I'm celebrating the empty tomb of our risen brother, our risen Jewish brother. My bad, everybody. I don't even mean to be this disrespectful, but you know, yeah. Whoever challenged us to put Tariq Nasheed's name in the title knew what they were talking about, and it is. I mean, it would be so. It's very tempting to earn your liberation into a Tariq hate show just for clickbait, but that's how they announced him when he entered the ring. Jesus, the Jew, Christ. Ding, ding. In all honesty, so listen, we're going to get a chance to talk with somebody who you know, one of the you know, things I don't honestly explore publicly that much, but one of my favorite lanes of study has been the Kemetic origins, Kemetic history and the Kemetic origins of a lot of the dominant religions and spiritual belief systems. And as I'll ask our guest, I just sent him. There was an issue with the link that, so I'm hoping he'll be here in just a minute. But as I'll ask him, you know, the great Charles Finch, Dr. Charles Finch, who I should look to get back on here again, or on here. I mean, he's been on my old radio show, but he's got last I checked, he and his daughter have a nice YouTube platform working. But I remember Dr. Finch talked about his study of Kemet, brought him back into the Catholic Church. And for me, I went, in the other sort of African-centered atheist direction. I went with John G. Jackson into atheism with it, but yeah, Dr. Finch I love Dr. Finch. I've interviewed him a number of times and would look forward to doing that again. But listen, our guest is here, so let me not belabor the point. And in fact, I'll ask him about it. Among many other things, and our guest's bio is extensive, but among many other things, Dr. Obatashaka has been described by the late, great Dr. Asa Hilliard as one of the most powerful deep thinkers in the world today. Dr. Tashaka is a master spiritual scholar, warrior, strategist, master leader, organizer, professor, author, and public speaker. Dr. Obatashaka is an organic scholar whose scholarship emerged out of the Black liberation movement of the 60s. During the course of a long life as a spiritual scholar warrior, no shadow has been thrown on his honor or character. He has been kind to his people and humanity through feeding the hungry, providing jobs for the poor, a roof over the heads of those in need, and a knowledge of self. His fearlessness has driven fear into the hearts of his people's enemies because oppressors fear uncompromising truth seekers who cannot be purchased for money, recognition, or a seat at the oppressor's table. I've put a link in the show description to his channel where you can learn much more about him. And without further ado, welcome Dr. Obatashaka to the show. Welcome to you, sir. Greetings. Good afternoon. And as I was saying, I did not realize when we were setting this up how fortuitous it is that it's on Easter Sunday. So I have a lot to ask you about that. I was just watching your interview with Dr. Diop and Obenga. But anyway, welcome to the program. It's good to meet you and get to have you here. Greetings.
Yeah, good to meet you. Good to be on your show.
So there's a lot I'd like to ask you about. In fact, if we could, I would even want to start there. When you talk to Dr. Diop and Obenga, his relationship and history with Cheikh Anta Diop, and so much of what they have unearthed in terms of the history of the Blackness and Africanness of Egypt or Kemet. How I'm starting there, but let me ask you, given today and your approach to the world, your understanding of the world today being understood in many circles of the Western world as Easter, what would you like to say about today, and how do you think it should be interpreted?
Well, Easter doesn't mean a thing to me, so it should be to interpret something that didn't happen. And I don't want to offend believers in Easter, but in my household, my wife knows there's a number of things that I don't care too much about, and some I should, but they're kind of like, So Easter, in terms of Kemet, Christianity, Islam, and Judaism all have their linkage to Kemet. Moses was a priest in the mystery system of the pharaoh Akhenaten. So basically, some of the foundations for Judaism come through his experience in Kemet. Though Judaism is a religion and the Kemetic system is a spirit system that a lot of us miss. In fact, most of our historians leave the spirit dimension of Kemet out. That's the foundation. So that is the beginning. And then Christianity grows out of that, and then Islam. So they all have their root in this, but they take it different places because those are religions. John Henry Clarke described them as monotheistic killer cults.
Male chauvinist murder cults and the handmaidens of conquerors.
Yeah, exactly. And in fact, when Constantine gets his hands on it, it's through a dream in which he sees his armies having the flag of Christianity. And so he embraces it as a religion of conquest. And that pretty well turns it into a state religion. Once others take it on in the Western world, that's not true of the Ethiopians, but that's true of in the Western world. It becomes a system of conquest that's used to justify slavery, colonialism, and so forth and so on. The African in America takes it a different place. Most Blacks have got a misreading of the African view of Christianity in America. We didn't embrace slavery, Christianity during slavery. When we embraced it, it was on our own terms. And that's why there's a big difference. I'm not a Christian, but that's one of my specialties: Black church, Black family, Black music. Those are subspecialties within three major areas: African American history, African and African American philosophy, and many other philosophies and many other histories, and then Black political thought liberation movements. But within that, African American culture, I spend as much time on as African culture. And so there's a whole misreading on the Black root of Christianity. In terms of Black Christianity, it's very different. And that's why the Black church is very different from the white church. Even though we got a lot of problems in the Black church, we also have some real strengths. So that's a whole nother story. So that's kind of my spin. But, like the 10 Commandments, 42 Confessions of Innocence, there's a relationship. It's just that these were not commandments in Kemet. You were testifying to the things you didn't do when you were going through judgment. You went through 42 netters. So you didn't steal, you didn't lie, you didn't commit adultery, you didn't commit murder. But then they also said you didn't instill fear in the hearts of another. Now, I'm guilty of that. I do that with my enemies, but not intentionally. I ain't got no army. Why are you afraid of me?
My suspicion is Ma doesn't count that when you get judged. I don't feel like she's worried too much about that part. you might get points. That's what I'm saying. You might get some points for that.
Especially not for us.
Right.
I mean, we got more than. I mean, if we can do that, you should get elevated to a higher level of heaven.
Right. That's it. So, but specifically though, and I wasn't prepared for this, to be honest. So and it's never been my expertise, but just something I've always been fascinated by. But I do remember that Obenga has written about Easter specifically, and the relationship of the egg in traditional African culture. The understanding of the egg as a generative source, so its symbolism being passed on or co-opted. I had mentioned Dr. Charles Finch just a moment ago, and his discussion of the co-opted Kemetic belief systems about the movement of the heavens and the sun passing over the equator and being suspended in the heaven along the cross of the equinox for 3 days and 3 nights, and all of this turning into, as you said at the very beginning of your comments, didn't happen in real life, but has been turned into this imperial mythology as is celebrated today. So anyway, just a few things I was thinking about, and as I belatedly realized, I think serendipitously, that this was going to be taking place on Easter Sunday.
In terms of DFL Obenga, we're friends. Yeah. And for your audience, I mentioned this to mine, the Dr. Obatashaka show. John Henry Clark, I apprenticed under him for 20 years. We were close friends. And I'm finishing a book on Seba, which is the African or the Kemetic approach to teaching. I'm a revolutionary. So I have systems, and these systems have been tested. And so what I do is they're micro systems that you can apply to yourself, and they're macro systems for society. And so I was interviewing John Henry Clark. The last interview I did in his wife's home, 1998. And I'd interviewed him for 8 months on the masters in his life. It's one component of the book. The book is a replacement system of teaching. Paulo Freire thought he was doing a replacement. It was a nice critique. It was not a replacement, because he was basically critiquing the fact that the Western system was a banking system where they drop information on you, you feed it back. But he didn't come up with an alternative for that. Other than critical discussion, it was more of a Socratic method. This is, on one level, it's the method for teaching on all levels, not just the classroom. And then on another level, it's on mastery. And so I was I take 6 masters, one of which is Obenga, another which is John Henry Clark, another which is my favorite leader, who's in the background here with the sunglasses, Amilcar Cabral. I consider him the best leader, thinker, strategist in the 20th century, bar none. I think his record put him up against anybody. So I'm looking at those. So I went to interview him, and Leonard Jeffries brought me. And Jeffries had told me when he brought me to the interview, Obenga's looking for a job. And I'd been chair of Black Studies 12 years, had stepped down. Wade Nobles was acting for 1 year. So I'm talking to John, just, what you're supposed to do with elders. I already knew the answer. I said, should we hire him? He said, if he wants to, of course. So I get on the phone and call up Wade Nobles. And I said, hey, Wade, we need to hire this guy, give him all the reasons. Wade said, I don't need any reasons. Get him out here. And so then we brought him out. He stayed at my house for 4 months. I got to see his rigorous research methods. And then, we interacted. He was at the department for 12 years. I got him the highest pay of anybody that came in with, full professorship. And that was because he had written 17 books, speaks 10 languages. At that point is the best person in his field. Prior to that, it was Jacob Carruthers and him. They were the 2 best on dynastic Kemet. So that discussion you saw that we had, that was just one of many, and that is one beautiful brother. And then he delivered a university, which, if you noticed in the beginning of the film, he went back to Congo Brazzaville. He had a relationship with the president and convinced him to build a university that now has 10,000 student capacity. He wants to build it to 40,000. And he works out of the president's office, whatnot. So he's a Pan-Africanist. In addition to being a multidimensional scholar, he's a Pan-Africanist. And his guiding light is Sheikh Anta Diop, who was a magnificent human being, not just a great scholar. The way he describes him, and this is Obenga in his 80s describing Diop. He describes him as a holy man because he had those characteristics, the personal characteristics. And by the way, his thought process was intuitive. He didn't have hardly any books in a library. He wasn't the greatest researcher. He, according to Obenga, he would come to a conclusion. It was always right, except for one. And, and build his stuff on that. So he was coming out of the old African method, which the European method is an analytic method, despiritualized. And so it produces scholars that may be very good at doing research and getting into narrow areas, but being creative, it kills creativity. You know what I mean? So Obenga is somebody that I really like. He's a great human being and great scholar,
So I definitely want you to elaborate on what Diop got wrong. But I was happy to see you interviewing Obenga, because years ago, I remember when a couple of us were doing radio out here in DC, we had a hard time reaching him. And there seemed to not be a lot of either interest or ability to get him into some certain circles out here, despite what only makes logical sense. So I was very happy to have found that interview that you did, and anyway, and encourage others to reach out to him.
I very rarely do interviews, a conversation. So it was a back and forth
conversation, of course.
I know Obenga inside out. So I was also using this discussion as an illustration of how someone goes from being a novice to a master. And by the way, I don't think I noted in the conversation, where Obenga actually met Diop. He had contacted him before for years, followed his path to master him, and that was indirect apprenticeship. But you know where they actually met for the first time? This is how apprenticeship works. The toilet.
Oh.
The toilet, because that's how apprenticeship works. It's informal. John Henry Clark, when he would talk about his master author Schoenberg, it was walking from the subway to the library that became the Schoenberg Library. You know what I mean? And that's where he learned his most important lessons. He was doing reading under his supervision, but that's where he got his guidance and everything else. So that was how they first met. And I don't know if we discussed it. I think we discussed it. Diop was a boxer. So he also put Diop and Obenga in the ring so he could learn how to defend a position.
Oh, damn.
He was a very nice guy, but he wasn't nobody's pushover. You know what I mean? So yeah, he was quite interesting. So seeing Obenga interact with students, he was active in the community, that kind of stuff. You got to see the whole person, and like all of us, we're all characters. You get to see that and see him in the classroom. And your point about why didn't they hire him? Eurocentrism not going to hire him because he is a threat to their paradigm. They don't want him. And by the way, that's how I got him the highest pay. He called me because Obenga was about as political as my cat. Him and politics don't work too well together. But he said, after we had agreed to hire him, a lot of people want me, and I need a lot of money. And I knew that was pure bull. But I went to a lot of people wanted him. Need a lot of money? Yeah. So I went to my dean, Philip McGee, one of the 4 pioneers in the Black psychology movement. Phil was a real good brother. And I said, hey, this is the best in the field. I just kicked the president's ass who had tried to destroy Black studies. And I was getting anything I wanted from him. You know what I mean? Because I have policies. When I whip you, I treat you with respect. Got him to my house, got him to give me all kinds of resources. So I said, tell the president that Obenga's the best in the world, and he deserves more money than anybody else has ever got. And when he ran it to the president said, why did he want to be there? And that was an easy answer. And so that was it. So yeah, that was Obenga. I need more money because everyone wants me. Now, why didn't African center departments have them? Some had them as lecturers, but why not as a tenured professor? I don't know. You know what I mean? Because he's the best. And as far as I'm concerned, I ain't threatened by talent. You go to a higher level when you're surrounded by the best. And Obenga was the best in what he did.
Yeah, I mean, you were talking about you've gone overboard with it. I was just talking about inviting him for a lecture or an interview or a presentation. We weren't even at the discussion of can you get him a job. It was just can you bring him around? I mean, and it seemed a very difficult task. So at least for my small circle. So that's why, again, like I said, it was very good. I was very happy to find in a more recent interview or discussion that the two of you had, because you're right. He's an intellectual giant and very important. You've mentioned already a number of names that are legendary. I didn't want to ask you. I just happened to be in a conversation yesterday about the institutionalization of hip hop studies, and my caution to some who were a little bit more positive on the idea than I was that having some experience and study myself in Africana studies, I was a little concerned about just a general happiness about any of these fields being institutionalized. So I did want to ask you, given your experience and the breadth of time and foundational role you've played in Africana studies, if what you would think of reflecting back on the state of the field. Or maybe what you would say to those saying excitedly that hip hop is increasingly being institutionalized as a discipline and a field of study in mainstream American universities.
Yeah, part of the question is, who are they institutionalizing? Are they institutionalizing really cutting edge thinkers? Are they institutionalizing people who may be popular? Maybe they've had a book that came out that was, regarded as good. Are they institutionalizing blacks? Are they institutionalizing others who have been influenced by hip hop? And I know in the case of one has written a massive work on hip hop and is, teaching at a major university. I assume he's tenured, I think Jeff Chan,
Jeff Chang, yeah, in fact, he was on. Well, no, Jeff. In fact, he was on the panel with me yesterday. As luck with, and he's not currently at any institutions, and that was part of the conversation that he's in one of those fortunate spaces where he doesn't have to be.
Yeah.
But yeah. Anyway, yeah.
Yeah. So in terms of institutionalization, you could raise the same question for African American scholarship. And I think that there are some rules for that. And those of us who have negotiated successfully didn't necessarily know the rules. We discovered them in the process, and you may have as well. So some of us think, for example, in the field of Africana studies, and some in hip hop may think the same thing. The fact that you're able to teach the truth, so you think from your perspective, and you're getting paid for it. So that's a good thing. Okay, so you think that's a good thing. Now, in my case, the FBI tried to bounce me out. They tried to kill me 3 times, and they tried to bounce me out of 2 jobs. One, just a junior high school teaching credential, which I let them beat me on. I could have beat them on that. And then teaching at San Francisco State. And I'm a revolutionary, but not in your normal definition. I don't come out of any Western framework of revolution. So what I learned, what I did, it proved out to be the way in which you can preserve, your integrity inside of the walls of miseducation. So the main thing I learned was this, that whether it's hip hop, Africana studies, whatever, the only way you're going to maintain your integrity is keep doing what you were doing before you got into university. And for me, it was that I would teach and go in the community and organize. I didn't have time for office hours, so you had to call me for office hours, And that kept me, because then I was building a group called Pan-African People's Organization. This was after the San Francisco Freedom Movement, which was my most important involvement in any organizing in my lifetime. That was. And so this was the successor to that. And so it was building a school, which still operates 51 years. And we did 2 shows on it. One was yesterday. We brought back 3 of our students who were, in the school in the 80s and the 90s, and one who was going to my alma mater, San Francisco State University, majoring in structural engineering. And we had her from the time she was 6 until through 11th grade. You know what I mean? So it was work in that, African liberation work, fighting the police, work in the UK, the United Kingdom, which I learned low intensity operations. I would have never known about it, and I'd be dead had I not been working in the UK and discovered the primary text on low intensity operations, because they dropped it on our group. There's not a group that survives low intensity operations if they don't know it and have a way to move on it quick, because if it moves on you, it's going to take you out. It's going to take your whole group out. They killed a whole group. You familiar with low intensity operations?
I don't think so. Or maybe, I mean, low intensity warfare. Is this the same thing? Okay. Mm-hmm.
And see, most of our movement activists don't know it. We know what they already did. That's how we get done in. That was authored by a guy named General Kitson, and a brigadier general in the British Army who defeated the Malaysian independence movement, the Mau Maus, which there was no such name. They didn't call it that, and went up against the Irish. Anytime you get a master, check their work out. That was designed to replace or do better than COINTELPRO. COINTELPRO is Mickey Mouse. It's rough and tough, but it's Mickey Mouse. I mean, if you really know what you're doing, you can defeat that. But this one is really rough. It's designed to stop a liberation movement from getting off the ground. And it was written for the American General Staff because, the special relationship of the British. And so Ronald Reagan took that. So I studied how Reagan took it to Sacramento and then, racialized it. And then how he took it to the White House and put it in FEMA. You know what I mean? So they ran low intensity on my group. And the person they sent in.
I'm sorry. So this is low intensity. What's the phrase again? Low intensity.
Low intensity operations.
Operation. This is different from low intensity warfare. And so could you break down a little bit of what Kitson, because I remember the name and I remember reading about, I'm assuming this was the same guy. Anyway, in terms of and you're right about the Mau Mau operation. But I'm sorry, could you tell us just if we could slightly detour? Yeah.
In one of my chapters, the last chapter in the book, The Art of Leadership, that took me 10 years to write. It's a 2-volume work, 1,000 pages. And so it's in the last chapter. Low intensity operations basically operates on this assumption that it is better to take a movement out before it can get off the ground than let it grow. And so it's basically a strategy for that. And that's what Kitson worked out in Malaysia and moved on the Mau Maus. The Mau Maus were not as developed as the Malaysian movement, but it was a serious movement. And it was opposed by Jomo Kenyatta. Jomo Kenyatta went against the Mau Maus when he came out of prison. He sent in a guy named General China to tell the Mau Maus to come out of the forest. And then when they got out, they were disarmed and given nothing, no land, nothing. Jomo Kenyatta was no good. Malcolm didn't realize that because he thought Jomo Kenyatta was a great person. So low intensity operations operates on the assumption that movements will go through stages. And the first stage is going to be invisible. And that's the stage where you're going out and recruiting to build a movement. That's when you really want to get a movement before it gets off the ground, period. So that's the first stage. Then it assumes that if it gets off the ground, it's going to go through a nonviolent stage. So under low intensity operations, nonviolence is considered to be threatening because reform is the mother of revolution. Not all revolutions, not all reformist movements end up being revolutionary, but just about every revolutionary movement goes through a reformist stage. And that's a mistake of revolutionaries to then, once they become awake, to then skip that stage because you're not going to be able to win any people unless you deal with their immediate issues. And those are reformist issues. But those reformist issues are survival issues in many cases. So that's the second stage. So in that stage, you get in, you stick people in the group, and then what you try and do is you separate the radicals from the group from the moderates and the average everyday people. And so that's the second stage. And then the third stage is what he assumes, and it's a harder stage for us to reach in this country, stage of armed struggle. And so then again, you try and do the same thing. You get in it and you try and fracture it while you're attacking it from the outside. And so those are kind of like, so it's stages of a movement and disrupting the stages before it gets from the very beginning to a fully blown movement. And it's got a lot of stuff in it. And because of his experience, then he used this to explain how you can get in a movement and disrupt it. It was specifically for Vietnam, but it was also used in the United States for something more sophisticated than COINTELPRO. So when Reagan comes into office, he has a National Guard commander who's put in charge of racializing this because America is a racial situation. So then low intensity operations is then used to pit racial groups against each other. When he gets into the White House, it's in FEMA. So you think that's just disaster administration? No, that's also low intensity operations. And
he put in he's the one that put in Louis Freed, right? Did Reagan put him in, or was that after?
Yeah.
Because his paper on because I got to shout out the late John Judge for this. He gave me that, he put me onto this some years ago, and I've read Freed's. I actually read his what was his, like his master's thesis or his whatever it was, and it was on how to deal with Black revolutionary groups once there is a FEMA style lockdown. And it was, and they talked about putting, you know, the I think this is where the King Alfred plan comes out of, or is connected. I can't remember, but because he talks about putting Black people into stadiums and turning stadiums into large carceral operations and stuff like that. So that's deep. That's
that's part of it, but he's coming from a deeper level.
Mm-hmm.
And that deeper level is the operational levels of how this works.
Mm-hmm.
So when any group gets hit by low intensity, the goal is to kill everybody. That's what they ran on my group, Pan African People's Organization. I did a series on COINTELPRO 2, and they're from experience, my experiences, and then the history of it. One was my experience in the Black Freedom Movement and in PAPO, Pan African People's Organization, with COINTELPRO and the specific moves they made on me, but on the group, and why we were able to overcome them. And then, so there were two of those that we did in the series. And then, well, actually one. Then the second one was on, and this I got from Akinyele Umoja, who's a really good brother. I've known him since he was a kid, when he was in he was in the African People's Party, which was the offshoot of RAM. And then years later, I saw him. He had the same face, the same attitude, nice brother. And so he told me in his research that he did on armed resistance in Mississippi, his PhD dissertation, that when he went across the Deacons file, the FBI was not able to penetrate the Deacons. So I did a show on that, why they couldn't penetrate them. Now that's the real success, not how you beat them when they get in your group. And then the third one was on the Symbionese Liberation Army and how it was used to try the operative who set it up, whose name I didn't give out because I don't like being sued. But we called him Double Cross. And he was put in our group, and he had just burned the Symbionese Liberation Army alive on TV. And he was sent in to do that to us. And we didn't know who he was. But I've been trained. I trained myself in this. I spotted him. I didn't know it was low intensity at the beginning. I knew that he was too well trained. They brought him in. He had my line. He was brought in by someone else. This was a CIA operation, by the way, not FBI. And then I have a security section. See, most groups have a security section. That's muscle. We had that, karate. I'm into Kung Fu. We were then into Taekwondo. We had 2 black belts that trained us. Yeah, that's fine. But real security is security. That's people who go out and spot people and uncover who they are and all this kind of stuff. And all my people are real smart. I recruited my best students at San Francisco State, best people off the streets, real smart, brilliant. And they all have their approaches that you're not going to really understand. And so I sent one of my people on to identify who this was. And sure enough, he was living in the place where Patty Hearst was when she was kidnapped. He was the one that actually trained Anthony DeFries, who became Sin-Q. He could no more be Sin-Q than my cat could be. You know what I mean? This was a guy who was trained in the prison complex. He had serious emotional issues. And when he was down in Vacaville, it was then a CIA operative who then started programming him for the Symbionese Liberation Army, which was a cutout group, a fake group, to make it look like it was radical. Had a little association with the Nguzo Saba Kwanzaa And Black National only had one Black person in the group, other than the person double-crossed that set it up, him. All the rest of the people were white. And these people were not agents. I don't know if some of them even figure out to this day what the group was, because it was a fake group designed to discredit groups. That was the point of that. And then scare people off, burn them alive. That's the best way to scare people off. So that was low intensity operations. And because in my group, people go through a transformational process. And we take them from wherever they are, because I've innovated 6 areas of thought. And one of them is what I call the 6-fold stages to mental freedom. There's a guy named Bulanlela Wabogo and myself. It's the only innovation I've done with help other than from God. The best stuff comes from God. I know that'll spook some people out. All great innovations come from the intuitive realm. And if you are privileged enough for God to give you something, you realize just how privileged you are. But in this particular case, this came from my awakening in the Black freedom movement, and then realizing that Malcolm X had gone through the same awakening Cabral had. And so a guy named Bulanlela Wabogo, who's a chemist, a martial artist, a historian, brilliant brother, jazz musician, plays piano. He had tracked this same thing through Frantz Fanon, Wretched of the Earth. So we combined together and we defined the stages that not only Black people, people of color go through when they're going through awakening. And mine was based on my own experience and others. His was based on Fanon. And so I take the group sense core, which was the major movement that I led, the most important thing I've done in my life. You go through that transformation. It's an 8-month to 9-month transformational process. It's linked to your organizing. We take people from wherever they are in their consciousness and try and raise it. And so our school that's been in operation 51 years, one of the primary teachers, Ustadi Kadiri, is a former student of mine, mathematician into science, a master community organizer, also a master mechanic and a master printer, and an everyday person that will make you think he ain't got a brain in his head. And that is what really worked. So when I suck him on, this guy that was sent into our group, he was the one that, with the help of a sister in the group, because sisters carry the culture and they'll spot stuff intuitively. You know what I mean? The two of them spotted who this was, you know, so, but because they had gone through the awakening process, they had the discipline. And that was what was missing sometimes in some of the Black liberation movement groups. Some of the leaders had some of it, but didn't complete the process. That's why Malcolm was so bad. He underwent a transformational process. That's why Cabral was so bad. You know what I mean? So so that was the key. But so low intensity operation, it's no joke. And the fact that the average radical Black or community organizer doesn't even know what it is, oh, shame on you. Because if they run it on you, you won't even know what to look for. By the time if you figure it out, it's too late. And when a group gets done in, you'll never know what did them in.
So, but how would anyone expect anyone coming up in struggle to learn this?
You know, by being in touch with some people who have some experience in this. That's why I'm doing the show, for example, in my case, I'm giving my case. I'm doing the Dr. Obatashaka show to do an exchange with younger people. So I've set up what's called the Parank Amilcar Cabral Ella Baker Leadership Organizers Institute. And I'm partnering with a young lady who's 42 years old, Dr. Brandy Faulkner, who's a full-time organizer, 22 years, coming out of Virginia. And she chairs Black Studies, Africana Studies at Virginia Tech. So we're partnering. So part of what we'll be doing is training people in this, you know what I mean, with younger people and learning from them, because the younger people have got some real good organizing approaches. This group-centered leadership, the Ella Baker format, I want to learn from that. And she's helping me in terms of figuring out how to get this to where we do it on the internet, but we do it in the community, because there's certain things that you're going to train like this that has to be done in the community. You know what I mean? So you need people who are seasoned, who do their homework. I mean, if you're an organizer, you should be studying your enemy. The stuff's out there. Study it. You know what I mean? And don't go down with this, woe is me, they're mean. This is war. I was in the Marine Reserves, a wasted 6 years. And so I didn't really get anything out of the Marines. I didn't use any of it in organizing, except I knew one thing. I got an enemy, and the enemy's deadly. You know what I mean? I didn't know how deadly, but they're deadly. And you get involved in a struggle, it's like a cook, you better be able to handle the grease in the kitchen. And if you can't, why are you in it? You know what I mean? So yeah, part of it is do your homework. And in this case, this book, The Art of Leadership, Volume 2, is out of print. I'm going to reprint it, but study that. And just low intensity operations, go look at it and look at Kitson. He has a book called Low Intensity and Peacekeeping Operations. So that's what I found in the UK, but I couldn't buy it. It was not for sale. I went back to my university, they had it, and I kept it for 20 years and studied it. And then my priest told me I had to give it back, so I copied it because that's that in the IFA system. To me, it was liberating something, you know what I mean? But since I wouldn't have to answer for that at the next stage of passing over, so I did, but I copied it. So it's really studying your enemy. Know your enemy, you know, study it. Yeah.
So of the other things that I wanted to raise with you today is, well, you've already talked a little bit about him and Dr. Clark. I wanted to invite a little bit more, if you would, given my own interest in Clark's life. I had the privilege of doing my master's thesis on him. But I did miss a chance to meet him in person. And my one chance, he was going to be at the Sankofa Cafe in DC. And I showed up, and they said he was too sick to be there that day. And then he passed shortly thereafter. But a remarkable person. And you said you did this series of interviews with him for your forthcoming book. I just want to invite another word from you, if you would, about Clark and maybe your relationship with him.
Yeah, he was, you know, he would say the same thing about his masters. The most important thing about Arthur Schoenberg or Wallace Huggins or any of the others was their character. He would always talk about what good people they were. And that's the most important thing about John Henry Clark. John Henry Clark was really the best of African-American culture. And he rarely talked about African-American culture, but he was a walking, talking, practicing example of that. He was a Black gentleman in the truest sense of the word. When he was growing up in Georgia, coming out of a very poor family, did sharecropping. He was the only one that was allowed to go to school. And he went to stay with his aunt, and he couldn't get along with her. So he asked another sister in the neighborhood to let him stay with her, and she did. And she had a rooming house. It turned into a house of, you know, ladies had to do something to survive, you know. And John respected them, and they took him in as their son and would go to school meetings and everything else. So when John would walk down the street, he'd tip his hat, you know. John was always impeccably dressed. And do not trace this to imitating white people. Older Black people carried out of slavery this sense of royalty, and he had no arrogance in him. So he was never around talking about, I was descended from kings and queens, which if it was true, nothing wrong with that. But he had that royal demeanor that comes from noble character. So that was John. He was a nice, caring human being. He had two sisters that worked in his study. He had one of those brownstones like Bill Cosby had on his show. And in the basement, that had been a dentist's office. And in Cosby's show, that was a doctor's office. And in that library, he had 25,000 books. And when John was blind, because I went to deliver the book, Return to the African Mother Principle of Male and Female Equality, that he wrote one of two introductions to right here. And he did it at a time in which he had cancer, but it was not aggressive at that point. And so when I received his review of the book, I mean, he had cancer. He was doing a million things, you know? And it's the only time in my life in which I felt warmth on my stomach. That was love. So I called one of the two ladies that worked for him to say how nice it was that he wrote this. And she said, go tell him. So she put him on the line. Well, these were two ladies. One was a retired nurse. I don't remember the profession of the other, that volunteered for John. But John said, I can't accept that. He paid him, you know? John and I met I don't remember exactly when, but we spoke on a number of platforms. One was at Haki Madabuti's place. And I was then writing The Political Legacy of Malcolm X. And he had already authored and edited the book, Malcolm X, The Man of His Times. And so before going in to speak, we had about an hour. I pulled out a tape recorder and I said, hey, John, tell me about Kwame Nkrumah. I got about an hour and a half interview that he told me, don't ever share that with anybody. And it was just truthful stuff on Nkrumah. And it wasn't anything to really, it wasn't a downer on Nkrumah, but John Henry Clark was in Ghana during Nkrumah's, period as prime minister, a little period of time where he sees Nkrumah stops his entourage. John Henry Clark's in the street in the poorest section of Ghana and gets out of the car and asks him, what is your black ass doing in Africa? And he said, well, I'm here to do some work. And he said, you must really love Africa, because he was in the poorest section of Accra. And so then he hired him to write for his newspaper. And that was one of John's proud moments. He has another story where, because Nkrumah was a part of the study group that Wallace Huggins had. And so he talks about Nkrumah and how he had these perfect teeth, and how when they have debates, Nkrumah would not put forward an argument until he could beat you. And then when he beat you, he'd tap you on the shoulder and say, I got you. Ha ha. So he tells the story, this is true, where C.L.R. James sends with Nkrumah a letter to introduce him to George Padmore, Malcolm Nurse, the real name, from Trinidad, who organized the Fifth Pan-African Congress and became a major advisor to Nkrumah later. And so he gets this letter. And then Nkrumah goes and apprentices under him. And John makes the point that it was his work with Malcolm Nurse, George Padmore, that was Nkrumah's best work, because it was Padmore who came up with the idea of the Organization of African Unity. It was Padmore who recommended that Nkrumah be open to everyday Ghanaians once a week, where they could come in and tell them anything, But this is the story that's funny. So they're at a conference that Nkrumah had called, and John was there, and Nkrumah pulls out the letter. He was smart enough not to give it to Padmore, and he reads it, and the letter says, this is to introduce you to John Francis Nkrumah. He's a little bit confused, but if you work with him, you can probably shape him into something.
Wow.
And then this was a joke from Nkrumah. Do you think I've amounted to something? And then he goes, that was one of his practical jokes. Ha ha. So those are the kind of things that you got from John. But for me, the relationship was, I was a mature scholar and an organizer and whatnot when I met John. And the first thing I did with him is, I said, well, so what should I study? And I had studied a whole lot of stuff. He said, Decline of the West by Oswald Spengler. I said, yeah, I read it. And I said, I read Man and the Techniques and Our Decision. John said, well, I only read Decline of the West. So then he says, read the 6 volumes of Churchill. And I'm saying to myself, oh, shit. But it was good I read it because it gave me some ideas on how to write something like that. You know what I mean? So it was that kind of stuff. And then I'd call John usually once a week. We'd have conversations. And so it was a lot of growing. It was an informal, that's what apprenticeship is. It was an informal thing, which was apprenticeship. And I was learning a lot of things from him. And then we would speak on different platforms. The last one was in the UK in 1995. John, my first wife, Obatashaka, and myself. And that was the last time John could go abroad because the cancer was hitting him, you know?
Yeah.
And it was at that one that I had to pull him aside and correct him on the Million Man March because I got what his point was on Farrakhan, and I'm not getting into that. And his point on some other people, and I'm not getting into that. And in fact, I could have more to say. And in fact, I gave him some stuff he didn't know, you know? But I says, hey, John, you got this Million Man March a little bit wrong. I said, if a million black men get together and piss at the same time, that's good. But I said, what they're doing, that's a big deal. And I said, guess what, John? This is more than the nation. I said, the nation is the one that is the major organizer of this. The idea came from James Bevel's, King's best mobilizer. And then I said, the second group that's doing the most organizing is the National Black United Front that I was a co-founder of. Conrad Worrell was chair of. And Conrad got a lot of stuff into Farrakhan that enabled him to have a good march, like how to organize a march. Farrakhan didn't march, you know? And one of our members, who's a mathematician, Leon Dixon, called up Conrad and told him, this is going to be a problem. This man don't know how to do a march. You better get to him and tell him he needs to figure this out. So Conrad met with the minister and he developed a good relationship with him and convinced him that he didn't know what he was doing and brought in Bob Brown. And Bob Brown was a principal organizer in the All People's Revolutionary Party, who, by the way, he was an organizer in CORE. CORE produced the most sophisticated organizer in the Black Freedom Movement and ain't acknowledged, you know, for it. Because we organized across the country, you know. And so he went to Washington and set that baby up, you know what I mean? So, you know, I just pointed out to John, well, you know, John, there's a lot more to this. And then I was in charge of follow-up. I got Conrad to arrange a meeting between me and Farrakhan, and I laid out a follow-up plan. I led the Bay Area committee because the minister, Muhammad, in San Francisco asked me to chair it. And I created a collective leadership. We had a couple of hundred people. Willie Brown was running for mayor. We jacked him up and got him to agree to 10 points. And then when he got to criticize Farrakhan during the Million Man March, we had another meeting with him and jacked his ass up because he was running again in a runoff and he had to eat his words. You know what I mean? So, you know, I just pointed out to him, hey, John, it's a little bit more than he said. Okay. You know, John was like that. And it was very rare that I had any criticism of him. It was a couple of times, but when I did, it was something real serious. Very, very rare. You know?
He although I mean to his last day he was overtly critical of Farrakhan and that march, but having been there in the audience as I was and having been there as a speaker as you were, all these years later, what you know, well, I guess you've made your. I guess your answer would stand. But I was gonna ask. You know, what is your reflection looking back in terms of the value of that day and Clark's critique? Because again, Clark's critique. You know, just for folks who may not be aware, part of Clark's critique was that the Million Man March was too much of a cult of personality around Farrakhan and not enough about serious grassroots organizing. And then he would equate it to, he would juxtapose it, that is, to the Japanese quietly after the Second World War, just getting themselves together and organizing themselves to actually be holders of power, whereas we were focused too much on symbolic, again, cult of personality driven events. So anyway, but that's if I've incorrectly, if you think if there's a better way of summarizing his critique, please clean that up. And then if there's any more you would have to say, please do.
Yeah, what I say is his critique also was that he saw Farrakhan leading people into Orthodox Islam,
Right.
and you know that's where it would end up. And you know, he also saw other weaknesses in Farrakhan, which I had no differences with him on. But in terms of my critique of the march itself, first of all, it wasn't Farrakhan's idea. It was Bevel's idea.
Right.
Most people don't know this, so I'm going to tell you. Bevel's, are you familiar with James Bevel's?
Oh, yeah, yeah.
Bevel's was King's best mobilizer because outside of the Montgomery bus boycott, King didn't organize. He was a mobilizer, marches. And without Bevel's, the march in Birmingham would not have succeeded because people were afraid to demonstrate. He brought out the youth. And without Bevel's wife, Diane Nash, there would have been no Selma to Montgomery march for voting rights. And I was a march marshal, got arrested there. So Bevel's and I would be on programs together and then we talk afterwards. So this is something most people don't know. Farrakhan was drawing 35,000 people a meeting up to a year before the Million Man March. And when I saw that, I said, unless you're doing this for the Democratic or Republican Party, that's a good way to get killed. You know what I mean? Because that's a huge number of people all over the country, you know? So I was wondering, why was he still alive? Bevel's was in a group that was tied to the CIA. Bevel's was not in the CIA, but Bevel's needed a job. And I forget, it was a group of psychologists. One of the sisters in the group had run for president. I forget the name of the group. They got word that Farrakhan was on the list to be assassinated. Bevel's went to Farrakhan to show him, because he was a strategist, to show him how he could get out of the sniper's lens. And he said, what you need to do is pull together a march, center it on a central principle of Judeo-Christian Islamic religious beliefs, atonement. And he said, if you line yourself in this, they're not going to be able to touch you. So that was the motive behind it. Farrakhan, only Farrakhan knows that now because Bevel's is dead. You know what I mean? And so I'm saying to myself, because I didn't know then that was the reason, atone for what? Black men coming up here to atone? Yeah, sure, we got some that have done some wrong, but black men ain't done wrong as a group. You know what I mean? What is this? You know, but I still saw the objectives. And so one of the things that happens, again, John didn't know this, Conrad, Haki, and others got Farrakhan to agree to a meeting in which Karinga, Farrakhan, Haki Madhubuti, and others, Conrad, they picked a person to shape a platform. So there was a platform for this march. It was political. It was delivered by Karinga because Karinga was given the assignment of writing it up. It was one of the poorest speeches he ever gave because he read it. And Karinga's a hell of a good speaker. I'm wondering, why in the holy hell are you reading this? You're supposed to have bullets. You know what I mean? Because his wife always feed him a note and then he extemporaneously go off. So it kind of put people to sleep. But there was a platform for this march, right? But the key thing, if you listen to mine was, and they gave me 2 minutes and I took 6. And it's the shortest preparation for a speech I ever did. It took me about 3 minutes to prepare the speech. And it had 3 parts. One part was, what historical time is this? This is the second post-Reconstruction. The second part was, what is this administration doing in this second post-Reconstruction? And this is before Clinton had done in welfare. I was pointing out, they're taking back the gains that we made, you know, in the second Reconstruction. That's what he's doing, you know what I mean? And then my third point was, this march will be measured not by this march, but what we do afterwards. When I met with Farrakhan, I laid out a follow-up plan. You know, I led the only successful Black power, Black freedom movement in the North. There were some successful in some things. We were successful across the board, defeating an economic power structure, the entire economic power structure of San Francisco for jobs. Organizing a whole Black community, 45,000 block by block, building 112 units of low-income housing that I lobbied for, along with a number of other groups, when the Black Power March was kicking off in Mississippi. And building a Black United Front, giving birth to the free speech movement, because those students that came from UC Berkeley got radicalized. That led to the free speech movement, and they say so. It was mainly inspired by the San Francisco freedom movement, secondarily by the Mississippi movement, because Mario Savio was first, who was the head of the free speech movement, was radicalized when he was arrested at the Sheraton Palace, which was a big job campaign of the United Freedom Movement against the hotel and restaurant industry. CORE basically took out industries for jobs and never lost a battle. And then we had students from San Francisco State who, when they were arrested, and Dick Gregory was arrested as well, who conceived of the experimental college. That is the forerunner of Black studies. Sonia Sanchez, Amiri Baraka, Askia Muhammad Toure, they first taught there free for a year, and then they taught another year. That was the embryo for Black studies. So I knew something about organizing and follow-up. And in CORE, our motto was mobilize to organize. So John's talking about, yeah, this is what the Japanese did. The Japanese could do it that way because their culture was intact. So they could go and move the Meiji Restoration and move it from feudalism to modernization quietly, because their culture was intact and they had their own society, and then beat the Russians in the Russo-Japanese War in about 16 minutes, wiped out their navy. So they could do that. Africans have been hit, and Africans in America, by slavery and by colonialism. So these movements that gave birth to Black studies, they were also marches. You know what I mean? And that's why Farrakhan had to be schooled on them, because the nation said they didn't march. So in the case of the last point I made at the Million Man March speech was this: this march will be measured by what happens after the march. It's not what happens here. And I laid out a follow-up plan. I always, when I start with something, I have a pilot. So I'm working that one. And then out of that, I see the kinks and work it out. So I was doing the pilot in the Bay Area. We had a couple of hundred people. And so then I showed Farrakhan how we had local organizing committees all over the country. So what we're going to do then is bring in sisters, bring in a cross-section of community groups we didn't have before, and then follow through with that. And I showed him how to do it. The problem with Farrakhan was the Nation of Islam. First of all, Farrakhan's not an improviser. I had a guy that shaped me. His name was John Dewambia. John Dewambia had been in the Nation of Islam for a short period of time. If you saw him, you'd think he was in the nation, but he was too independent for them. So he was in for a short period of time, but he was close to Malcolm. And some of my best organizing I learned from John Dewambia. He died at around 96 years of age. And so John told me, he said, you know, Malcolm had told me in the 50s, he had organized, he had brought in the best minister in the Nation of Islam, and he gave his slave name. And he said, he's just got one problem. What do you think that problem might have been? Asking you.
Ego.
No. He can't improvise. He said he's not good at.
I should have. Yeah, I didn't track it. I should have tracked. Obviously, you laid it out. I should have tracked it. Sorry about that. Yeah.
He's not good at improvising. And then the Nation of Islam, not good at working with other groups. But in the case of the Million Man March, they opened up, because Conrad deserves a lot of credit for that in terms of getting on the messenger and pointing out he needed to reach out to these other groups. And then, the minister listened and did that. That's why he was running around the country talking to Black churches, talking to Black groups, all different kinds. You know what I mean? So what ended up killing the follow-up was the Farrakhan didn't really know how to do it. Neither did his ministers. And when you're trying to give them directions, they were either didn't have the ability or their ears were closed to it. Like when I'm doing the local organizing, the local minister is telling me, because we're breaking up into committees. I got a collective leadership. It's not just me. I got sisters in the leadership, and they don't understand any of that, and especially committees, because everything is done from the top down. And I'm telling them, you can't sustain a movement like this based on one person. You know what I mean? So basically, he didn't know how to do it. That was basically it. And he had no vision beyond the Million Man March. So it was a little bit more than what it appeared to be to John Henry Clark. It was a lot more complex than that. And the basic failure was a failure of follow-up, because, you know, he was able to pull off another Million Man March years later and did pretty good because the youth like him. You know what I mean? So a lot of young people turned out. And there was a Million Women's March. I didn't see no criticism of that one. And they were good. Some militant sisters. You know, they had their own networks, you know. So, you know, they got a million sisters there, but I didn't see nobody criticizing them for that. So yes, Farrakhan was at the center, but it was a lot more than Farrakhan. And there was a lot of stuff. There was a lot of potential there. So, you know, that's what I think of it. You know?
Sure. Right on. So we got a couple questions coming in, and unfortunately, I have to be a little bit mindful of the clock. I hope you're doing all right with time, but I'm the one with a meeting in 45 minutes. So I had hoped 2 hours would be enough, but it never is. So we'll have to just keep this going at some point. You mentioned it real quick. I did want to ask you. You made reference to the Japanese having their culture intact, and previously, and I know your work focuses on this. What to you is African culture, and why is it important that it be a focal point of organizing work in particular, but just in general? Why? What is it to you, and why is it important?
Well, and you should be asking, what is African American culture? Because I don't deal with one without the other, because history is something that, you know, you draw from your past to apply it to your present to produce change. You know what I mean? So for me, African and African American culture are cultures first centered on spirit. Not spiritual. There's no word in any African language for spiritual. That's a theory. Spirit. That's the foundation. And that's what's left out of most studies of Kemetic or ancient African civilization, is the spirit foundation. That is what it is. Medu Neter. What is that? The language of Kemet. God speak. And then Medu Nefer, human speech that approaches God. And so even their writing system, spirit-based, which also means that in your speech has to mirror truth. And that's why in Kemet, the oral preceded the written. They gave birth to writing, but the writing always followed the oral. And what was that? Truth. So if you look at Bambara culture, which is, there's an African cultural unity, they stress the power of the spoken word. So what's the power of the spoken word? The vibratory force of the word, which is what? Truth. It's truth. And so African American culture, spirit-based. And that is like the foundation. When Blacks drop what people consider to be something Christian into Christianity, that's the voodoo they were practicing on the plantation by diviners. And they dropped it into what's called Christianity. Now it's gone at all different kinds of places and all that, but spirit is at the foundation of the culture. African and African American cultures are lineage in Africa, lineage-based, clan-based, and extended family-based. Two of those couldn't survive enslavement, but extended family could. And so second to spirit in African and African American culture is family. If a basketball player slam dunks, he thanks God and thanks his mother. And if he gets him a contract, who does he buy a house for? Mama. Shaq O'Neal, whatever you might think of him. And I certainly don't like the fact that he was for Trump because of Trump's tax thing. You know what I mean? But when you see Shaq's mama come in, a little woman compared to him, what does he do? Mama. He gets real humble. Mama. Yes, mother. Huh? Family. You hear me? And then in African American culture, what's next to that? Freedom. But our definition of freedom is different from the European definition of freedom. For them, it's arbitrary, it's power. For them, the exercise of freedom is the exercise of power over human beings, over nature, over everything. That is their big thrill, power, arbitrary, comes from Hesiod. For us, our freedom comes out of hunter-gatherer societies. And then it comes out of the first agrarian democracies. I did a show week before this week on Africa, the Birth of Democracy, where I dealt with stateless societies and showing how they inherited from the hunter-gatherer societies these notions of freedom and democracy. And basically, African historians will all tell you that African democracy is consensus-based. One of my innovations in thought is twin lineal families that comes out of this book, Return to the African Mother Principle of Male and Female Equality. And twin lineal means not matrilineal, not lineage from the mother, not patrilineal, not lineage from the father, not matriarchy ruled by women, not patriarchy ruled by men. But twin lineal means, and this comes from, this is the biggest breakthrough I've done in my own research. What God told me was the basis of just societies of Africa. And that message was where all the males and females were equally empowered to govern every phase of society. I knew God was giving me hunter-gatherer societies, which I hadn't figured out that was the basis for. It's too simple for me to get. And that is the legacy that Africa receives, because that's the longest lived period of human civilization, at least over 100,000 years in the hunter-gatherer state, where you had no leaders or followers. You had no slaves. You had no abuse of women or elders or children. And it was the highest stage of civilization. These people operated on the highest levels of paranormal powers, which the Kemites respected. They were the founders of Kemet. They're the Anu people that gave birth to Kemet. They're also the founders of China, Japan, and the Philippines. Anu, A-I-N-U, same people. You know what I mean? So at the heart of African culture is this principle that the people have the say-so. The people run their own life. And so even in the kingly systems that come later, at the village level, it was all the males and females being equally empowered to govern every phase of society. So African scholars are agreed that the African form of democracy, which it gives birth to, not the Greeks, is consensus. Africa's in trouble right now because you've got the consensus of the gun, people with gunpowder, people who have been trained in the West, people who don't care 2 cents about the lives of their people and less than 2 cents about African women. You know what I mean? And if Africa's going to come up, the African woman has got to come up, because she is the one that holds up the culture. She's the one that's feeding Africa. And if you put power in her hands, she's going to look out for the family. Now, you got some corrupt women. I'm not romanticizing women, but by and large, keeping her out of the equation is keeping the African down. The European could step on his women and run the world. The Asians could have their patriarchy, but not as brutal and vicious as the European one, and maintain some kind of power. But the Asian woman has a memory of that time in which to be a woman meant to be equal. That's in China, they have that memory. So you'll usually see in Asian economies, the women are the ones who are controlling the money at the household level. That's a residual of this more ancient period in which women had power. So democracy is at the core of the African and the African American. The African American does not like hierarchy. The African American does not like somebody over us telling us what to do. We resent it. And if you look at when blacks move out of slavery, so-called emancipation, the institutions we form give blacks the greatest leeway to have a say-so. The black churches they form, they're the ones where you can pick your own preachers. And the black movements, by and large, blacks have a say-so. King, when he's talking about the Montgomery bus boycott, he said, I didn't organize this. I stepped forward as a spokesperson for the people. Now, his was not as democratic as Ella Baker's, but they were both democratic in the sense that they were speaking to the interests and needs of the people. You know what I mean? So there's a lot more. This culture here, it's the popular, in the US, is the popular culture of the US and the world, and it is the most complex culture. And it's got all kinds of mess in it due to slavery that we have to get out of it, But the heart of it, it's African. African. One final one, there's a lot more to this, but just off the top, it's a dramatic culture. African people are drama people. And I'm not just talking about African American. And I don't mean the way a lot of the ignorant means it, acting out and screaming and hollering. No, everything's got ceremony to it. Even the smallest occasion is dramatized. That's the African in you. You hear me? John was giving the example when Padmore and Nkrumah went to a village to electrify the village. And Padmore was very westernized. Didn't wear any African clothes or anything, but he was into time. Everything's supposed to start at this time. Africans ain't into time. You know what I mean? And he was impatient because to turn a light on, which was a big deal in a rural village, there was dancing, there was drumming, there was speeches. It's the kind of stuff we do here. You know what I mean? And then they turned the light on. He didn't get the fact. That's African people. We dramatize the smallest things. If you're asking somebody for directions, they're going to give you every kind of motion, shift their hips in every kind of way, and then say, it's turn at the gas station, and then 2 blocks down, turn at that big house. You know what I mean? They're going to give you African direction. They're not going to say go east or west, but it's going to be drama to it. And then if they don't know how, after everything they say they don't know, but you're going to get drama. That's our music. That's our speaking. That's everything we do. That's Black folks. That's our food. Drama. It's seasoned. I mean, so that's our culture. It's in us.
Right on. Phenomenomics, thank you very much. 2 of my favorite people I've come across in these YouTube teaching streets. What a great crossover episode. Thank you very much. Appreciate your super chat support. Thank you. And for the kind words. Shout out to Sister Coco, who is in many ways very much responsible for this crossover event. So big shout out to her and the launch of her forthcoming program on BPM. Is asking, how does understanding African histories help with knowing your enemy, or how to respond to the enemy when engaging in the liberation struggle within the U.S.?
Well, a lot of different ways. Of course, when you're engaging your enemy, then that enemy is going to be one of your best teachers, along with your people, and along with all the gifts you carry inside of yourself. But in terms of how does your enemy's operation in the past affect how you understand and deal with your enemy today? Well, a lot of different ways. I'll just give you one. I apprenticed under a great master teacher, Jacob Carruthers. And Jake was a great human being, also very humble. And so he exposed me to some aspects of Greek philosophy that's normally not looked at, and one of which was Hesiod. I mentioned him just briefly a little while earlier. If you get into any European philosophy department, they will not teach Hesiod. He's an embarrassment to them. But he really reflects not only the Greek worldview, but the view of the masses of Greeks and of Aryans, of whites. And so his definition of freedom, if you're going to understand the enemy you're dealing with now, you need to understand how this definition, which comes out of the depths of Aryan culture, work. So his definition of freedom was arbitrary, that whatever God had in terms of power, God did what God wanted to do. And it had nothing to do with what was right. And that is the fundamental definition of freedom today among Europeans. It's a fundamental way in which they exercise power. If you look at the Supreme Court basically mouths the will of the powerful that run and own the country. You know, Chief Justice Oliver Wendell Holmes was asked, what was the basis for Supreme Court decisions? And he said, it inclines towards the powerful. And then he later said, I regret saying that. That sounds Nietzsche-like. Nietzsche was the modern equivalent, because he advocated will to power as the driving force of history, meaning European history. He was the modern equivalent of Hesiod. Hesiod was kind of fundamental European. He couldn't write and read. He was a poet and he was a sheep herder. So they find him embarrassing. But he expressed the will of the average Aryan person, and particularly the rulers. So how does that help you today? Understand, when you're going up and against an opponent today, the only rule they have is winning. There's no ethics to it. Anything they say to you, don't believe it. You hear me? Even if it's in writing. And you'd better know how to wield some power to beat them. But understand, it isn't what you think it is. And then when they get through messing with you because you thought that their words meant something and you're going, woe is me, they weren't fair, that's how they work. So if you're going to fight them, know that. That's your first rule. The second rule for us should be, don't be like them. You can beat them without buying into their rules, because if you become just like them, there's no winning. And some of us, we have the popular view of, well, the reason we lost Africa is we weren't mean enough. No, we didn't have gunpowder. That was the main reason. And even though some of our people who worked in iron, blacksmiths and stuff could make a weapon, it wasn't mass produced. It didn't have much range and so forth. So that's the reason why we're here. Not because we couldn't fight. Not because we were too nice. No, we just couldn't blow holes in people from a distance the way they could. You know, it was a technology. There was a lot of other reasons, but that was the fundamental reason.
Oh, right on. Sorry about that. Thank you very much, Coco. Jacques LaRoche, I hope I'm pronouncing that close to correct. Dr. Ball, can you ask Dr. Oba if he was young again and know everything he does now, what would he do?
That would have been a disadvantage, because I think one of the greatest things about joining the movement when I was 21 is I didn't know that much. And so therefore, what I did was situational. And so I responded to the situation. And I didn't know my own gifts. And so I discovered them through battle. So I think that it was a privilege to be at this stage where I didn't know a whole lot, but I was learning and I was open to learning. So I wouldn't want to be at the stage I'm at now then. because I think I'd have been second guessing a whole lot of stuff. And, because movements are unpredictable. A lot of people think learning chess will prepare you for war. No, chess got predetermined rules. War doesn't have any. And so one of the good things about youth is, especially Black youth, we're open to change. And so then it's a question of what do you learn? So it's a classroom. The movement's a classroom. Your teachers and your teachers are your people and your enemy. And then all the things you bring to the struggle, So no, I wouldn't.
Hey, I like that. Plus, I've come to a different understanding that the game Go is far more preparatory for war, even in the context that you described, than chess. It's far more complicated. It's more layered, and it's more suited to the African ability to engage in non-linear symbolic thinking.
So is that the Chinese? Is that
the Chinese?
Yeah.
Yeah. The Asians play it a lot, and we started. I watched a couple documentaries on it. Started playing with my children, and it's I forgot the number, but the per move, the possibilities per move ratio from Go to chess is hundreds to one or something like that. It's like infinitely more challenging and differently engaging with the senses. I'm terrible at it. My children are already way better. So I have hope for the future. But anyway, but I really appreciate what you were just saying there about
just the thing
the fantasy about chess. Yeah. Sorry, go ahead. Yeah.
The thing I want to add on that is this. The Asian movies, and particularly the historical movies, I just got through watching a thing on Netflix that I watched about 6 years ago. It's called The King's War, and it's the period following China's one of my specialties. I'm not just into African history, Chinese history, Mexican history, Toltec, a number of others, European history, European American history, because I'm a warrior. So you got to know your enemy as well as others, But you'll see in all these movies, and that includes the emperor who finally wins and unifies China. A key reason, he had talent. But of all the talent, he had strategists. I'll tell you this. If you're in a movement and you don't have one, you're in trouble. You hear me? And strategy is the ultimate art. I'm a strategist. I did not know I had this gift. Because how would I? There ain't nothing in school to prepare you for this. My mother didn't say, oh, my son, now she's dying and she's in the bed. She had years to live, but she was in the early stages of dying and raised her finger up. And she said, she was a Leo, I'm a Leo. She said, my son, and she would always use the correct pronunciation, my strategist. You know what I mean? So she could see that in me, but she saw it later, because how could she see it as a child? I mean, what can you do that would illustrate that? So strategy is the ultimate art. And the Asians are very good at always seeing that they build into anything they do a strategist. Strategist doesn't have to be the leader. But if he isn't or she isn't, you'd better listen to him. And it's a gift. And I always say this, you can't train a person to be a strategist. It's like you can't train a person to be a singer. They either got the gift or they don't. And the worst thing you can do with a Black singer is train them, because we got conventions that come out of the culture. Now, you can train a strategist by being around other strategists, or a strategist will learn through the battles that they carry out. But it's the ultimate art. Only two things higher, God and love. Nothing else is higher other than those two. And it's such a refined, because all arts are aesthetic. It's an art of beauty. And so when you take an opponent out and you're a strategist, you do it with beauty. You hear me? and you take out opponents that are far stronger than you. So that's the art. And so if you got one, I don't care what position they hold in a group, put them in a position where they can orchestrate moves. Because you can try and refine a singer, but if you can't sing, you ain't gonna be able to teach nobody how to sing. And if you don't have speed, you can't teach somebody how to run fast. Everybody can run, but can you run fast? That's a gift. Strategy is a gift. You hear me? And some of our leaders would still be around if they had a strategist, or they could have had a better chance of evading some of the hits they faced. And in the end, in battle, the question is victory. How many victories you got? We're always talking about, oh, this is a heroic person, blah, blah, blah. Historic movement, blah, blah, blah. What did they succeed in doing? That is what the objective of strategy is, to win. I got 3 W's: win, win, and win. Those are the 3 rules. Win, win, and win for a just cause. And I have no arrogance. When I enter a battle, I know this is the one I can lose. I know if I underestimate my opponent like Muhammad Ali did, Leon Spinks, no teeth up in the front, Spinks, he knocked him out. You hear me? Because he's a heavyweight.
I mean, but that has as much to do with, I mean, you know, at the end of the day, though, age is the only undefeated. I mean, you could have all the strategy in the world. You step into the ring with somebody half your age, you're going to lose.
But he won the second time. Why? He went out and trained.
Okay.
He went out and trained. You see
you're
how
right on.
When he fought him the first time? Huh? Yeah, you're right. I mean, if he's in the ring with somebody.
No, I'm with you. Yeah,
but even
I'm with
so,
you.
Look what happened. He beat him.
Right on. Okay, right on.
I was better than him at that point.
Yeah.
In every way, especially power. He had a hit that was like a tree trunk hitting you.
Yeah.
But he figured out, tire him out, and then beat him. And then he psyched him out and kept him out of the ring for years. Saved him, you know? But he could have beat him the same way the next time unless Holmes learned how to fight a long fight. 15 rounds. Could he last that long? That's the only way he was going to beat Muhammad Ali.
No, you're right. I couldn't help. My bad. You're right. Right on. Let me let Leah's question take over here. What does Baba think of liberation theology? Is it such a thing? Can it be useful to us?
Yeah, I think it's a good thing. I'm not a Christian, so I want to stress I'm not pushing a religion. I'm not into any religion. But liberation theology, which was influenced by the Black Freedom Movement and the Black Power Movement, basically encouraged ministers and as well as people in the church to take up the struggle for Black liberation. And then at a certain point, that became also an African-centered orientation. So that's a good thing. Now, someone like King, he wasn't an author of liberation theology, but he gave examples to it. Cone was a major author of it, but he was the practitioner of it. King was. And I have nothing but respect for King. First, because he had integrity. The people came before money with him. And that was the same thing with Malcolm. And he saw his task was to win. He just couldn't win after the South. His methods were not suited for the North. And he never figured out what those methods could be because he had found winning methods, particularly in Selma and Birmingham. And he had been a part of a winning movement, the Montgomery bus boycott. When you translate that to the North, that ain't going to work. And if you got any kind of moral appeal, you can forget it. You know what I mean? In the North. And federal intervention, that ain't happening. You know what I mean? So,
but some of his stuff, I mean, I do like some of what he was talking about, the taking rent from the poor and instead of going to the landlords, redistributing it and permanent, marches and rallies that disrupt, that don't end and disrupt, but I hear you that,
march, But
it would have been nice to see if he had not been taken out at 39 or 36 or 37, whatever his age was. He might have figured something out. But you're right. Yeah, I'm sorry. Go ahead. Yeah.
But the march had limited value in the North. Now, Black Lives Matter proves that you can use it. You know what I mean? It's good for publicizing police violence and stuff, and it's a way of channeling mass anger. But you're going to get limited results when you're going up against the police. But you got to go up against them. The thing that I think with a group like Black Lives Matter is you got to also be able to segue, continue to use that, but then move into areas in which you address the real needs of the people and you can produce results. And one of those areas is economics. Not just businesses, but jobs. And not just jobs, but good paying jobs. And then there's mass organizing. The march, you mobilize, you got to do mass organizing. You know what I mean? That's real key. King didn't understand those things. He admitted he didn't know how to build power. He admitted it, you know. But in the North, those tactics that work. See, what happened in Birmingham is he hit a brutal spot. And so that was his best planned campaign. They picked Bull Connor because Bull Connor could unleash the dogs and build sympathy. So that got him civil rights legislation. That ain't working in the North. You know what I mean? You can sick dogs, shoot people, everything else. The government, at that time, the FBI wouldn't do anything, but later they might come in and investigate and then exonerate people or not do anything. So you got to know how to build power. King was trapped in the North with not being clear about which issues were central. He was dealing with housing. He was dealing with education. He was dealing with employment. He talked a little bit about the police. When you're into threefold definition of an opponent, you don't know where you're going. And when he ended up marching into the suburbs of Chicago, that was about as foolish as you could get. I mean, what are you going to get from that? You know what I mean? And white people don't want no black people out there. And so he got a worse response than he got in Mississippi, which he didn't spend too much time in Mississippi. And I don't blame him because they'd have blown him away in a minute in Mississippi. You know, he come in and speak and fly out. And it's what he should have done. You know what I mean? So the point is, he didn't know how to build power in the Northern setting. And that was his problem. But he had victories up to that point, but none after, because his strategies were suited for the South for a particular period of time. So he accomplished his goals. He did the best he could do with his time. You know?
Right on. Yeah, I saw something like this too, Jacques, that Go has more combinations than atoms in the universe. But yeah, right on. One more here, and then unfortunately, I think we're going to have to wrap up for today. But Dead Man Animations, Dr. Ball, can you ask Dr. Obatashaka about his books and his methods for people to heal from their contradictions in this colonial society?
Yeah, I've written 5 books, and I'm finishing a 6th and 7th. And my first book was The Political Legacy of Malcolm X. And it was listed #1 in the New York Times by Michael Eric Dyson. And Dr. Asa Hilliard, who also reviewed the book, thought it was a good book. So that's my first book. It took me,
that was my only issue with your bio, by the way. The Dyson reference, him co-signing is to me, I can't, it's not a bonus, but I'm with you. I'm sorry,
I'll take it wherever I can get it.
Yeah, I hear you. Right on.
So that's the first, and then the second 2 books, The Art of Leadership, Volume 1, and you see Cabral, Ella Baker, Garvey, King, and Malcolm. These are not books on great Black leaders. These are books on leadership systems, organizing systems, and then The Art of Leadership, Volume 2. And the person that you don't recognize, the light complexion person, that's Dr. Nathaniel Burbridge, who led the NAACP in the San Francisco Freedom Movement, one of 4 radical leaders of the NAACP at the local level in the 60s. Had 2 PhDs, one in pharmacology, one in medicine. He also set up the medical system for Indonesia under Sukarno. He was a radical, and he was my
Wow.
buddy, a beautiful black man. You understand? So these two volumes, these are used all over the country in different parts of the world by community organizations, black churches. I have a chapter on the black church, various black organizations. And then the book that I've just mentioned, Return to the African Mother Principle of Male and Female Equality. This is a book on African just societies, and it comes from a vision that I received from God and leads to this twin lineal conclusion. John Henry Clark and Asa Hilliard write introductions to this book. And then my fifth book is The Integration Trap, Generation Gap, caused by a choice between two cultures. And that's an Anu person. I had Dr. Diop and Obenga provide the translation for the Medu Neter script that you see on this cover. And I thought that Flinders Petrie's translation of this was probably wrong. And Obenga pointed out that it was. So on that cover, you see 3 vertical registers. That means great ones. That was the name of the Anu. That little person you see with the left foot forward, that's an Anu. And he's a leader of an Uo, which is like a state in Kemet, or a gnome. And then the animal figure with 2 ears, that's Set. That's the symbol of the pharaoh, because in pre-dynastic or ancient Kemet, it goes back 10,000 BC. And I have a series on the Dr. Obatashaka show that covers that. You should check it out. The symbol for a pharaoh was not Horus. It was Set. And then the rest of that. So what Obenga translates this to mean is the great one, in this case, the one who's holding the staff of authority, has come to the temple of a men to worship the god, and that is Set. Now, the great one, Set, is the pharaoh. And so pharaonic systems set up in ancient Kemet. Dr. Finch and myself are probably the only ones that have spent time studying ancient Kemet, going back 10,000 BC. Dr. Finch has a book out now that I'm trying to get into his order system. When I try and get in, it's not working. So I have to have the guy that hooked me into this, who's my computer man, to get me the book. I really like Finch. Finch is good. He's very good.
Yeah.
The Star of Deep Beginnings.
Oh, yeah, man.
It's a masterwork. So brother's a great scholar. So, and you can get this when you go to my show, click in and where the language is below it, and it'll go take you to Gumroad. And then you can purchase the books through Gumroad. I'll send you an autographed copy. I'm finishing my 6th and 7th book, which is Seba, Where to Know the Truth is to Be the Truth, that I discussed earlier, which is a replacement pedagogy or teaching system that applies to all areas of life, but it is also a mastery system. John Henry Clark was one of those that I deal with. But the other part of this question was, how do you deal with healing, dealing with what we're going through now? The 6-fold stages to mental freedom, which is one of my and Vulanlela Wabogo's innovation. On my site, I'm signing people up, and when we have 40, we're going to be doing a year of training on the 6-fold stages to mental freedom, and it'll be twice a month, a couple hours a day each time, and it will be tying in what you're doing in the community to improve your community with your own personal transformation. And I've got a number of people that I took through this system who will be working with me. And I'm probably going to have someone else. I'm not going to say until I get them committed, but it's a major person who reflects this in their life. So this is a healing system, not for people who have mental disorders. It's not going to work if you have paranoia, schizophrenia, which is caused by a sick system. Now I'll put people down who have this. but this isn't going to cure you from that. But if you have the normal things that come from catching hell in America or anywhere,
just the run of the mill trauma, just the
this will definitely take you through this, but it's your choice. It depends on what you do to take you from one stage to the other. So that's key.
Right on. Well, Dr. Obatashaka, again, the link to your show is in the show description below. I encourage people to check it out. I will continue to do so, and we'll have to do some more of these. There are many unanswered questions and areas to go into, but I really appreciate you coming on, and I think it was, I mean, it couldn't have been more perfect that it was on Easter Sunday, to me at least. So that was, I really appreciate that. So thank you again, and peace. I really appreciate you coming through, and look forward to building some more going forward.
Yeah, I think you have a good show, and it's a good topic or title that you have for the show. And people can get to me if you just put in DROBATSHAKA, Dr. Obatashaka show, and that'll just come up. It's a long address, but that'll come up, and then check it out. The shows are like chapters in a book. I've done, I think it's 136 shows. And so they're in depth. And I've come up with a new school of history, and I'm laying out the foundation for that. And it's various issues that we've covered. And I have some good people that come on, like Babazak Kondo,
Mm-hmm.
who is the foremost authority on the assassination of Malcolm X.
Mm-hmm.
And it's interesting because who he nails as being responsible ain't too popular for Black people to hear, but not a single critical comment on that. And I found that real interesting.
Well, I don't know. It depends. We've had him on here a number of times, and it depends on, you know, and then Brother Kalanji had Wesley Muhammad on, who had an interesting response, and there was a discussion of a debate, but I tend to be with you on that. Baba Zach is pretty thorough, so you know, we'll see. But anyway,
Zach's book was inspired by mine, and he sent me his rough draft before it was finally finished. I had very little correction, very little. It took great courage for him to put this book out. I don't think he told you. But I have a friend who went also to the same university that you teach at. Babazak Kondo had issued orders to his family to be prepared for his burial. He figured he'd be killed for that book. And he was right. Certain people have been in power, he'd have been dead. I'm not going to say who, but I'm going to say other people were in power, and so he wasn't, you know. But his stuff is based on thorough documentation. And
one day I'm gonna build with you offline, because Mama Sybil Clark said something to me about Baba John Henrik, similar along that same, you know, that he was found himself in a similar position at one point or another. So I'm gonna rap with you at some point about that for sure.
Towards the end of his life.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think I know what he was talking about. No, I don't think he was, because
she thought he was. That was my point. That was my when in my one unfortunately too short meeting with her, we had a very interesting discussion about that. But you know, it's not for public.
He might have thought that, but no, it's precisely because of who he was dealing with. That wasn't going to happen.
Okay.
Had it been prior, that would have happened. Not with him, John, but definitely with Baba Zak. That would have been it. And there's a lot of reasons to prove that would have been it. You know what I mean?
Yeah, right on.
So
anyway,
I say that is a masterwork, and people right now, the book's out of print. He's revising it.
He's working on another one. Yeah, he's working on a new one. Yeah. Or an update. Can't wait for it. So anyway, Dr. Obatashaka, thanks again for coming through. Look forward to being with you more. Yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
In the Nation of Islam, what do you expect them to do? They're going to criticize it, of course. And they should. But what's your basis? That's all I say. Show me the facts. For meat eaters, show me the meat. You hear me? Huh? If you can't show the meat, you can talk all that talk. And so people that don't know can say, oh, it's this way or it's that way. But look at the facts. Huh?
Perfect way to end. Thanks again. Peace to you. Take good care. Look forward to more. Take care of yourself.
Okay.
Bye-bye. All right, everybody. Big shout out to Dr. Obatashaka. Shout out to Sister Coco for the encouragement, background encouragement, and all those who helped put this together. Thanks to the remixers for coming through and joining us today and supporting the platform. Please continue to do so. There's any number of ways you can do it. Pick one. But the big thing we're really trying to push these days is making sure you all are signed up with blackpowermedia.org, so you can always stay in touch no matter what YouTube and Google and anyone else might decide that they want to do going forward. And you never know at what point we're going to, and Kamau is constantly trying to offend somebody and get ourselves in trouble. So please continue to do that as well. I think that's it. And I got to run. So thanks, everybody. Peace if you're willing to fight for it, like Fred Hampton used to say. And catch you next time here at I Mix What I Like and throughout the BPM platform. Enjoy Sundays later on this evening with the Ear Doctor. Come on back and get your good musical mix. And we'll be back with GIU in the morning and a whole week of the remix. All right, everybody. Thanks again. Peace.
I mix what I like, what I like, what I like, what I like. I mix what I like, what I like, what I like, what I like, what I like. I mix what I like, what I like, what I